The dog ate my homework, as you can see. Not time right now. Luna is Shrimp's female pit terrier, and I left her alone with my book for maybe a minute and a half in the living room, and she took a bite out of it. So she's in timeout now. But I did finish the book, despite the dog eating my homework. And the book is called Confessions of a DC Madam: The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail by Henry W. Vinson, with foreword by Nick Bryant. And Nick Bryant is the author of The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. And Henry Vinson is a very interesting character. There's a picture of Henry. He is was a gay funeral director. He was enrolled in the Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science, attended Southwest Virginia Community College, and by the age of 22, he was a funeral director for the W.W. Chambers Funeral Home in Washington, D.C. And then he owned and operated, just by happenstance, he met someone in the escort community, and he purchased the largest gay escort service in Washington, D.C. And he did this very ingenious marketing idea where he basically figured out what the other phone numbers were for escort service in the DC area, and he called those numbers, realized that several of them were out of service, and he purchased those numbers and used them for his gay escort service. And he eventually came across a man called Craig Spence, and he crossed paths with Mr. Spence at a certain point. I believe it was in the late 80s and 90s. And there's a picture of Henry when he was a boy. And Craig Spence was essentially the Jeffrey Epstein of this particular network, which was mostly boys. And I'm skipping around a bit here. There's William J. Casey, who is an ex-director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He made use of Henry Vinson's gay escort service. He had a penchant for teenage boys with swimmers' bodies, with little hair on them. And despite getting asked several times to procure underage boys for this network, Henry would never cross that line. He refused to pander children to Craig Spence and to this guy, Lawrence E. King Jr., who is the villain or the antagonist in the book, The Franklin Scandal. He was the Epstein of his particular pedophilia entrapment ring, sexual blackmail ring that Nick Bryant uncovered, as I mentioned. And the reason Mr. Lawrence E. King is mentioned in this book is because he was friends with Craig Spence, or at least acquaintances. And there he is. He had steely brown eyes that showed very little emotion, because he and King were both sociopaths. And Spence eventually kind of descended into addictive madness, smoking crack and getting caught with a gay escort, a la his usual nighttime activities in New York City by the NYPD. And that was kind of the start of his official downfall. Although in reality, he had become so mentally unhinged and so out of control of his addiction for smoking crack and doing cocaine that he could no longer be the point man for this pedophilia entrapment ring. And he was extremely powerful, Spence was. He basically had his own Praetorian Guard that was the Secret Service at his disposal 24/7, 365. I mean, this guy had serious clout. he had such clout that he could give gay escorts, some of them underage, tours of the White House at night. I mean, that's some juice right there. That's serious juice this guy had. And Spence killed himself. And Henry believes that Spence actually did kill himself, even though he may have gotten a warning to kill yourself or we'll do it for you. He thinks that Spence had no choice but to do that, so he did in fact do it, and that's what the powers that be wanted, was for Spence to kill himself. Lawrence E. King is still alive. He served, I think, 10 years in prison for the money embezzlement of funds at the Franklin Union, the Franklin Credit Union, which gives its name to the Franklin scandal. But this is about the DC ring that Henry found himself kind of involved in without knowing it. He got blackmailed by Spence after telling him about his gay escort service. He observed generals, 3-star generals at these parties. He observed really powerful politicians and other senators, really, that were part of these. And he named some of them, too. It talks about William Casey, as I said. Casey's involvement with both Spence and gay escorts is, quote, perhaps additional corroboration that Spence's blackmail activities were affiliated with the CIA. And Henry Vinson actually spent several years in prison because of basically being in the crosshairs of this ring due to the fact that he knew so much. And he was basically the guy who owned the gay escort service, right? So Spence came to him and started paying him $20,000 a month for escorts. And anybody who has a client like that is going to do what they can to make him happy, right? And it wasn't until later on that Spence kind of engulfed himself into the network and took control of it via blackmailing Henry. And Henry tried to remove himself from the network. He wouldn't pander children to these guys, so he got his house smashed up. He got guns shot outside his windows, and he talks about that. And I mentioned some books like The Mighty Wurlitzer, How the CIA Played America, published by Harvard University Press, and it provides a sweeping overview of Operation Mockingbird. And a second book, Catherine the Great, by journalist Deborah Davis, is a biographical sketch of Washington Post publisher Catherine Graham, who was the widow of the original Mr. Graham, who had control of the Washington Post. But that book focuses specifically on the clandestine connections between the CIA and the Washington Post. According to the book, called Catherine the Great, and numerous sources, the CIA's Frank Wisner tapped then Washington Post publisher Philip Graham. I forgot his first name, but there it is. Philip Graham, who eventually died, and that's why Catherine Graham, his widow, took over, to be the CIA's Operation Mockingbird point man to infiltrate the media. And this book is it's very well written, first off. I saw very few mistakes. I saw maybe 2 grammatical mistakes, but a lot of new words that I don't usually read in everyday, everyday reading. Words I didn't know before, or words you just don't see quite as often. Soliloquy. I actually knew it was before, but a couple other ones too, which are escaping me right now. But it's written the approach in an approachable way. It's not esoteric, and it's actually very G stuff. Talks about sex, power, blackmail, eyes, and there's media pundits like Eric Severeid, Ted Koppel, William Safire were all in attendance at Craig Spence's parties. High-flying politicians, including Senators John Glenn of Ohio and Frank Murkowski of Alaska, also attended Craig Spence's get-togethers as well. Spence's home was also a lure for various Republican movers and shakers, including former ambassadors Robert Newman, Elliot Richardson, and James Lilly. And as I mentioned before, I think thrice is nice for mentioning then CIA Director William Casey and John Mitchell, the disgraced former Attorney General under Richard Nixon, who were personal friends of Spence and also frequented Craig Spence's soirees. He goes on to say, though, with a bit of a caveat, although Craig Spence's home was a magnet for DC elites, he doesn't necessarily think that everyone who graced his parties was compromised, similar to the Epstein Island. That's something that Virginia Joffrey said. She said not all men took part in the partying, but on the other hand, many of Craig Spence's party goers were lubricated on alcohol before they had illicit drugs and a wide variety of sexual playmates, including children, dangled in front of them to tempt them, of course. If the partygoers succumbed to their temptations, they were undoubtedly compromised. An individual merely discussing illegal activities in Spence's home, like me, says Henry Vinson, had the potential to compromise. So this man, Henry Vinson, he lived quite an interesting life. You know, he lived in Appalachia in a small town, West Virginia, where it was very taboo to be a homosexual. He wasn't aware of this until he was about 15, I think. And I remember reading when he tried to tell his mom one day, he approached her to tell her that he was gay. She basically said, "I already know. I already knew." She said something to the effect of, "I already know everything I need to know about you, Henry." And he said that it was apparent to people around him before it was apparent to Henry that he was gay. He would hang out with like the most popular pretty girls in school, and they kind of protected him from bullying because I guess the popular girls just could tell the alpha male bully guys whatever to do, and then they just did it. It's kind of funny, but sad too that he got bullied, and that's the reason for that. And he talks about his family and just the gross treatment of really the feds against his mother. I mean, they arrested his mother while she was dying from cancer on an oxygen tank, and they put her in cuffs and put her in custody for 4 hours before Henry posted bail for her. I mean, there's just no limit to what these people will do if they feel like you can compromise them or they feel like you know too much. They will arrest your dying mother who's on an oxygen tank. They will do that, as they did in Henry's case. And he also talks about his lawyer, this woman. I can't remember her name. It might say, yes, Greta Van Susteren. There she is. Kind of a weird looking woman. But yeah, he ultimately wasn't completely trusting of her, even though he didn't say that. That's what it kind of seemed to me, because it seemed like she changed strategies for him. But I think she was just ultimately going up against the government, and you pretty much lose. It's very, very rare you get a win, especially when the government judicial system is so corrupt. And Henry also talks about his personal life too, how his older brother Charles, they called him Butch. He was one of these popular jock alpha types who was really popular with everybody. And he died very young. I think he was 22 when he died in a construction accident. And that, he talks about how that was really hard on his mom. But he did outlive his mom, and his mom and his sister died too, I believe. So he just had a lot of heartbreak in his life, a lot of darkness, a lot of ups and downs. And he mentions Shakespeare, alludes to Shakespeare several times. And he calls Craig Spence the Prince of Darkness. Since my second face-to-face encounter with Spence, I had truly come to look upon him as the Prince of Darkness. I assumed that every visit I made to his home was recorded, and I also felt that he had the power and connections to crush me. but I managed to provide him with escorts that were fast of expectations, and we ultimately arrived at a detente of sorts. Although I had to regularly assuage his outbreaks of grandiosity and insanity, he continued to spend up to $20,000 a month on escorts. And that's the opening paragraph of chapter 9. But today, Henry's a free man, even though he's been to jail twice because of this for a total of, I think it was 8 years, I want to say. 3 years the first time and 5 years the second time. And he also had the IRS attempt to audit him and try to suck him back into the judicial system. Surprised he's alive, to be honest. And I'm not surprised he got harassed like he did with all the knowledge that he possessed and the blackmailable material that he witnessed firsthand because of being, you know, at these parties that Craig Spence hosted. And this book is hosted by Trine Day Publishing in Walterville, Oregon. Shout out to Chris Milligan over at Trine Day. So if people want to go and support him, they can. I mentioned this because we talked about Chris Milligan at the charrette, and I was reading it, and I finished it today. Again, I'm going to talk to Nick soon. I'm going to message him as well. I finished his book. I'll do a review of Nick Bryant's book as well. Confessions of a DC, the Franklin Scandal. But this is Confessions of a DC Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail by Henry Vinson. Foreword by Nick Bryant. Really fascinating book, and I think essential history for people who like investigating the masters of the dark arts and the government agents who make use of this blackmail, because it's such a taboo topic in many ways. It's uncomfortable to talk about, but also not many people, and Americans especially, know this stuff even goes on. But here we have the proof, and 25 years later, they still, refuse to unseal the files. So that is that's unfortunate. But it just goes to show you they fear what more information is contained in those files. This has been my book review of Confessions of a DC Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail by Henry W. Vinson, with foreword by the trailblazing Nick Bryant. I couldn't find any social medias for Henry Vinson, but the links to the Amazon and Amazon UK buyer pages for this book are in the description box below. Let me know what other books you'd like me to review, or if you've read this book. Do you have any other books you suggest I read? What do you guys like to read? Let me know. I would like to know. I'm very interested. Stay frosty. All the best from the East Coast. I'm in New York. And more videos coming soon, more book reviews, and more content on the way. Stay frosty, folks, and all the best.